This week on To the Contrary.
First, abortion rates are down, but the rate of self-induced abortions is up. Then, the debate over pronouns. Should they be gender neutral? Behind the headlines, women, girls, and financial literacy.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, self-induced abortions.
The overall rate of abortions in the U.S. is down, but more women are self-inducing. Those are the major findings of a new report published by the Guttmacher Institute. 18% of treatment centers reported seeing a patient after an attempted self-induced abortion, up from 12% 3 years earlier. Meanwhile, the abortion rate dropped, continuing a long-standing trend. Hundreds of new abortion restrictions by states could have played a minor role in this drop, but they are not suspected to be the main driver. The report cites the main reason for the drop is a drop in birth and pregnancies overall. Yet these restrictions and anxiety over how President Trump's Supreme Court picks will vote on abortion rights have led more women to seek alternatives to going to a doctor. Some women's rights organizations are helping women get more information on inducing their own abortions. Experts say under optimal conditions, such a procedure is generally safe. Complications can carry risks for some women.
So, Ann Stone, what do these two trends tell us about what's going on with abortion and Americans' thoughts these days?
Well, something I've tried to explain to my friends on the right, and that is the genie is out of the bottle. First, they rightly mention that the rate of abortion is down because the number of women of childbearing age is way down as well. But there's an entire movement in the country to teach women how to self-induce in the event that Roe gets overturned.
I think this is terrifying, and it just demonstrates that women don't feel like their access to abortion is getting more and more restricted, and they don't feel like they can go to medical professionals for help.
But when we look at the actual statistics in the Guttmacher report, the overwhelming factor driving this decrease has to do with an increase in access to contraception, which, yes, we can thank the contraception mandate in Obamacare, but in large part it's because women are turning towards long-acting reversible forms of contraception, such as the hormonal and copper IUD, which has like an under 1% failure rate in practice.
Yeah, I think it's terrifying, too, what's happening to a woman's right to have an access to a safe and legal abortion, because I don't believe that doing your own self-induced abortion and self-diagnosing is as safe. And having spent my entire adult life on Planned Parenthood local boards, state boards, and on the national board, I know how difficult it is for women who don't have access to our clinics.
Anushay, you say terrifying.
I just think that, abortion has become so politicized in America that it's no longer seen as a part of comprehensive reproductive health care for women. And you have to trust women with decisions about our bodies. And I think that the fact that we're going back to, a time in the 60s when women used to do this. Now it's 2019. We should be making progress on women's rights, not going back.
Actually, my mother did it in the late 50s, early 60s, yes. And not with a chemical, with a knitting needle, which is all they had back then.
But 2 points, and that is the point you made about contraception. Guttmacher in the past has shown that 60%, that's a 6 and a 0, % of abortion was due to the failure of contraception, either the failure of the user or of the contraception. So as contraception gets improved, the abortion rate's going to go down, down, down. Also, I will tell you, Roe is not going to be reversed.
Yes, and also, if you look at the breakdown of the decreases per region, abortions decreased just as much, more in California than they did in the South. They fell by 16% in the last 3 years, as opposed to in the South where that rate was lower, which goes to show it is a change in culture. It is a better understanding of how contraception works and a better appreciation for the value of a human life. And that's a good thing. It is a
but
good
what
thing
about
that
the
people
woman's life who is self-inducing abortions and risking death?
If you look at the number of women who are still self-inducing abortions, it is so statistically insignificant in relation to the amount of women who are not getting abortions because they are not getting pregnant in the first place.
But the report from the Guttmacher Institute that we're talking about is talking about an increase in this trend, right?
Yes, but it's increased in a small number of people in absolute terms.
Context. Yeah.
And also, it doesn't matter if Roe v. Wade gets overturned or not. If you come from a state like I do in Missouri, where basically we have one abortion clinic left and the governor just tried to shut that down and the courts are now holding it open. I mean, basically you wipe out Roe v. Wade, and it's horrifying to say, oh, I've got to go to Illinois to get an abortion, or I've got to go to Kansas to get an abortion. That really hurts poor women. And also, this self-diagnosing, you don't know if you have an atopical pregnancy.
Right. Exactly.
What are you doing when you're doing this? You're not seeing a doctor.
And also, thank you for the context, but one woman doing this to herself is one woman too many. Every woman's life counts.
Even with the, even chemically, which is with the mifepristone, which is pretty safe.
I think
it's safer than surgical abortion.
Right. But in comparison to giving yourself an abortion with a needle, is, I mean,
I don't.
But that's not what women are doing.
But I mean,
the internet.
What has made
medications.
getting? I think of the lines, the sometimes physical assaults, certainly the verbal assaults, the protests that this administration. I mean, it's much of those many of those clinics have in the past been protected by the Justice Department sending out marshals. This Justice Department is not sending out any marshals.
That is a big part of that's a big part of why the self-induced has gone up too, because women are afraid to go to the clinic.
Right, but if, as Tiana said, that's a tiny percentage of what's going on here, then why aren't pro-choice Republicans asking this administration to enforce the laws, which is you can't come within so many feet of somebody trying to access a clinic.
Right, that presumes we're not, because we are. We're also looking at other alternatives for the women as well. And the problem is you have things, talk about the protests, look at the doctors that have been shot. Like Dr. Tiller, killed in his church while he's ushering.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say a couple things. One, it wasn't happening in St. Louis, and the women were not being protected as they go to the abortion clinic there, and I drive by that every day. And two, the article also talked about the fact that there are all these Google searches, thousands and thousands of them, of women looking up coat hangers and abortions.
18% of all pregnancies in this country end in an abortion. Let's not act like it's rare.
Let me finish. So what you have right now is you have generations of women that thought they could go to doctors and clinics and have a safe, legal abortion, and now they're saying, where do I go? I don't know what to do. They're going on the internet. We sit here and we talk about it has this pill and that pill, or you could do that. There are tons of women out there that don't know about that. They're in a brave new world
Well,
right
not
now.
only that, but a lot of, it never ceases to amaze me how many particularly young women don't even know when they're, until they're 3 and 4 months pregnant. I mean, shouldn't there be, and that, of course, a lot of that you could put on the religious right for only allowing, where they have the political power to make that decision, only allowing abstinence-only sex education, which is like no sex education.
But it's the Republican Party that's been trying to push in the Senate for contraception deregulation to make it so way the 1 million or the millions of women who are still not covered by health insurance, so way they can obtain over-the-counter birth control. That is a bill that's been proposed by Cory Gardner and Joni Ernst, and that is a bill that Democrats, particularly ones lobbied by Planned Parenthood, have continued to push back against. Choice before conception is the most important thing this country has.
Absolutely. That's very, very true. And the only way that, once again, the Republicans are pulling away money from Planned Parenthood that gives birth control
counseling. To reallocate to other Title X facilities. It's not as though
the Republicans are the party of women's health.
Title X facilities, like the
Title X
anti-abortion clinics that
or the ones that offer contraception.
No, the ones that are run by the church do not offer anything.
Every $1 spent on Title X facilities, including ones that don't offer abortions, reap back $7 in taxpayer savings by reductions in
cancer rates.
But wait a second,
you're not talking about you're not including, I'm not sure if they're Title X or not, to be honest with you, but the religious centers that pose as abortion clinics, which there are probably way more of. Well, wait a minute. There are way more of them now than there are actual women's health clinics.
Yes.
So you're not talking. They're not going to give it out under any
taxpayer funding. Those aren't the ones
that Republicans are trying. I can tell you right now, they're in Missouri taxpayer dollars.
I'm pretty sure that under Bush, they started to get federal
Crisis
funding.
Pregnancy Center, CPCs.
But
exactly.
it isn't redirecting from
Excuse me, if I might just, it's not just clinics. You can go to a doctor. They're not under gag rules. And one of the things I think needs to happen is 1-800-doctors ought to have questions about whether or not that doctor is willing to counsel on abortion. I think that would be very useful because you don't have
make
to go
him
to a
or
clinic.
herself a target for a killer?
I would be terrified to identify myself as a doctor that provided abortion.
All the Looney Tunes out there.
You can do it vis-a-vis. They find out anyway, whether it's on 1-800-doctors or not. They find out. Well, you see these protesters out in front of these apartment buildings that have doctors in it, and you're shocked that they found out that the doctor does X or Y. So the point is, provide the information to people who are actually looking for it.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter and at Bonnie Urbay or at To the Contrary. From abortions to gender and grammar.
Grammy Award-winning singer Sam Smith recently revealed he is gender non-binary, or rather, they are gender non-binary and would prefer to be referred to in the plural third person instead of the grammatically correct first person singular. This is but the latest twist in an attempt by some members of the LGBTQ community to be referred to in plural and not as he or she. The issue sets up all kinds of questions. First, as to whether all members of the community agree this is the way forward, and if not, how to keep track of how each person wishes to be identified. Then there's the question of changing grammar rules in grade school, something which opponents of gay rights are quite likely to challenge.
So this use of the plural, third person plural instead of the first person singular, good idea or bad idea?
I feel like this is a community that's educating us. And I think it's an education, and if that's what they're putting forth, I don't think that I'm in a position to be like, actually, if you want to be called that, then that's too confusing for me and it's an inconvenience. So I approach this and view it as an education.
This subject always makes me so sad. My dearest friend in the world was a gay male who died of AIDS. And I can only think of what he'd say. I mean, he'd think this was ridiculous, that there are only two sexes. But you know what? I don't know. I guess I don't care as much. I just don't want to see people fired if they misuse a pronoun. If this really is that important to them, I'm willing to honor them that way. But again, people should not have legal consequences if they misuse a pronoun.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way that you do and that you do. I'm fluid on this, and I think we can always adjust. Language is always evolving. Yeah. It is not a stagnant thing. And if we can use they and other terms, and I can say they left their phone and an individual person left their phone there, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. I don't think you should be fired over it. But you know what? As time evolves and language evolves, we'll see what happens.
I'm pretty attitudinally libertarian on this in the sense that if someone wants to identify as a piece of Jell-O, I don't really care. It's up to you, I think, to define the terms of how you want to be called, how you identify, whatnot. But I do think it is strange how the LGBT movement has evolved from really caring about your right to exist on either side of the gender binary to ignoring its existence at all. And from a social perspective, I don't care too much because it doesn't affect me how other people want to live their lives. But it does become a problem when we start acting as though the scientific gender binary doesn't exist. And I mean, these are problems that we don't necessarily want this level of wokeness approaching the biological sciences and especially the medical sciences. And I think that there's a way for us to affirm that you have a right to identify yourself as you want and you're deserving of human dignity and respect, and also not punishing people who don't necessarily remember to use a plural pronoun to refer to a singular person.
Well, you referred to getting fired for misusing a pronoun. Mm-hmm. I assume you're talking about calling a LGBTQ person she or he when that person would prefer they.
Yeah,
that's actually the misuse, the improper grammatically.
I'm just saying in general, I don't want people fired for that kind of stuff.
Okay, but let me, because you and I both go back this far, when Gloria Steinem came out with Ms. magazine, what the women's movement did is create a new word, not distort the already long time meaning of the grammar that's been part of the English language for centuries. That's where I think that's why this is so controversial. And Ms. wasn't controversial at all because nobody was
No,
being...
it was. Maybe not in your circle, but oh yeah, it was. It took a long time before conservative women could actually use that and get away with it.
Well,
but
okay, but there wasn't media coverage like there is of this about how horrible...
Maybe not, not the drumbeat, but I'll tell you, in my circle, it was pretty intense. But I have to say, I'm probably the only person at the table that actually knows a hermaphrodite, somebody who has both.
Right.
And even they have to choose. Oh, you do know one too? Okay. Girlfriend's sister. And they had to choose and chose female. So, you know, there are cases where
doctors
it is.
Usually did because it was easier to make a child of either or with bits and pieces
if they
of
had a
both
vagina,
gender.
If they had a vagina.
Right, into a girl.
Yeah. But, so, I mean, there are legitimate scientific reasons at times you're going to have something that would be binary. But overall, I just think in some areas it's gotten out of control where people are losing their jobs or not even just being fired, but being drummed out of or being shunned.
I have not heard of that.
I'll send you lots of articles.
Okay.
Again, in my circle, I see a lot.
But and what about this perspective? On the one hand, a person may feel very supportive of LGBTQ rights. On the other hand, not feeling comfortable using what are considered improper pronouns. What is that person then therefore anti-gay? Or what?
No, I don't think they're anti-gay at all. I mean, there's just a comfort level in how they want to talk and are used to talking and addressing, and I don't think that means that they're against a gay person. I just think it's a comfort level and a change level, and I think we're going to have to be fluid and give this some time and give people some time.
We'll get there.
The only area I care about is with children. So obviously the trans movement has been very important for those adults who continue to have gender dysphoria into adulthood. If you look, the science is relatively settled that allowing an adult who still identifies as something other than their biological gender to affirm that decreases suicidality. However, the overwhelming majority of children who have gender dysphoria tend to subsist out of it and then just identify as gay or lesbian. However, this push for us to affirm 5-year-olds who believe that they're boys instead of girls, rather than say, let's work it out, maybe you're just a tomboy, maybe you actually will identify as the other gender in adulthood. In that case, you should be allowed to affirm it and you should be treated with respect. But this strange progressive push to kind of encourage the idea that gender is fluid, it defies most social science and most biological scientific studies that demonstrate that gender is a pretty fixed part of your identity. And when you are transgender, that is a very strong and salient feeling that doesn't necessarily ebb and flow based on social affirmation.
I mean, if a little girl likes trucks, is that bad? No, I say that's evolution.
All right, behind the headlines. Do women have a different relationship with money than men? Yes, they do, according to a recent survey. While women are more driven to reach financial independence, they fall behind in investment and savings compared with men. That, according to a 2018 survey conducted by Logica Research on young adults aged 16 to 25.
Young women said, or were more likely to say, that they wanted to be financially independent from their parents and that they understood the importance of planning for their future. They were more likely to spend 30% less money than young men. They were more likely to have a second job, but they had 40% less in savings.
Carrie Schwab-Pomerantz, board chair and president of the Charles Schwab Foundation, says the math doesn't work until you dig a little deeper.
Half of the young women were likely to have an investment account versus the boys. And if you ask them if we gave you extra cash, would you invest it? And only half the number of young women said yes. So we're falling behind right away.
The financial gender gap could be narrowed if women improve their management of day-to-day finances.
But then they were more likely to borrow from their parents. They were also more likely to skip a credit card payment. So some of it just, like I said, didn't really add up. I mean, so they have the right mindset, they have the right desires. It's just putting them into action. It could be just the pressures, the social pressures among their friends, dressing nicely.
Parents
Parents tend to teach sons about building wealth while teaching daughters about fiscal restraint. They thereby set up a different financial expectation from early on.
Parents talk to their daughters differently than their sons when it comes to money. With their daughters, they talk about the short-term concepts, such as savings and household expenditures. But with their sons, they talk about estate planning, the stock market, borrowing, and that's all about wealth creation. So again, we're sort of setting our daughters up for failure, long-term failure.
Bob Pomerantz sat on President George W. Bush's and President Barack Obama's advisory councils that promote financial literacy. She advocates for teaching financial literacy in schools.
Only 17 states in this country require some type of personal finance embedded in curriculum, and then there's only 5 states that require it as a standalone. And the first state to require it as a standalone was Utah. And the reason that they required it, or they did that, is because they saw that they had some of the highest bankruptcy rates in the country.
She also helped create a program, Money Matters, for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America.
And what we have found is that these young people who go through our program, the Money Matters program, are more likely to seek out college and seek out scholarships and funding for college. So you could see right there, that's all about economic mobility and new opportunities for people and what difference that financial literacy can make in someone's life.
While it seems like a really good idea to have universal financial literacy classes for high schoolers, I mean, I can't imagine why it's not being done already, but what about, who are these parents who are not teaching their girls to be financially literate? I thought my parents did it, and that was 50 years ago.
Oh, yeah. I had to put it aside. Any money I made, a big portion of that went into savings, and you didn't touch it.
I remember saving for my very first job. I remember worrying about not having enough money to retire comfortably in my first job when I was about 19 years old, and putting part of that away. I mean,
I really think what's interesting, because I've really been trying to get the takeaway, and as she said, there's some conflicting things going on here. I wonder if it's not also a confidence thing, to dream big, like the guys. They're investing, they're looking into the future, make money, and the women are more hoarding and household goods and taught that way. And I'm wondering if that's how we treat and teach our women, that you're not the big picture people. You're not going to be making the money. You're going to be taking care of the littler things.
It is changing, but you hit on to something. I actually give seminars on this. Financial literacy and teaching women negotiation are things that are not skills they do pick up at home. It is the way most nuclear families have been organized. It is starting to change, but it's slow. And it is probably one of the most important things we can do for women's empowerment, next to teaching them women's history.
But we are also seeing so many more women who are breadwinners now in their families. Right. And I also feel like it, I mean,
and you know what else that I don't think she mentioned was women, if they have money, are much more likely to spend it on their kids than save
and
it
invest
for
in their families.
Yes.
I mean, what's funny, I actually I don't know if I agree with that package and what she's saying, because I know so many women who, I mean, I wish I was taught like that when I was growing up. I think financial literacy, I mean, I think it takes precedence over, I don't know, now I wonder why we were learning algebra, in the 8th grade. We should have been taught more about money management. But that aside, I know so many women of different ages in my life that are, I mean, they are the boss. I look at them and I'm like, wow, I wish I could be like that, about, whether they own their own business, whether they're an investment banker, whether they're the breadwinner. I know a lot of TV anchors. I mean, it's amazing. I applaud women.
Surveys show the package.
So you're referring to an anecdotal slice of a very privileged segment of American society. The thing that's sort of embarrassing to me about that package is the idea that it has never been easier to make your money work for you when you aren't using it. There are apps like Robinhood, there are apps like Coinbase, you can invest in crypto. And the fact that women, I believe they're referring specifically to Gen Z women, aren't taking advantage of that. There's this.
But on the flip side of that, there's also there's PayPal, there's Venmo. You could spend your money
a lot
with apps
too.
And technology a lot more easily.
Certainly, but I mean,
past.
The first thing you learn at any economics or finance class 101, like still in high school, is that returns on investment are greater than returns on labor. And I mean, there is an immediacy to Gen Z that I think didn't necessarily exist even for my generation, millennials, because we didn't grow up with the cell phone in the pocket. But that being said, it has never been easier to learn the ins and outs of trading, of day trading, and so if girls aren't taking advantage of that, I'm sorry, that's not the patriarchy. That's girls not taking ownership of their future.
10 seconds, Deb.
I was going to say I didn't get to econ classes till I went to college.
You also didn't have the internet in your pocket.
All right, we're out of time, but thank you. Great debate. We'll continue some other time. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the Cornell Douglas Foundation, committed to encouraging stewardship of the environment, land conservation, watershed protection, and eliminating harmful chemicals. Additional funding provided by the Wallace Genetic Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary. Be more PBS.